welcome to the Voice Matters. Just to remind people, this is part of the Croakey's Medicare 40-year series project, which is the 40th anniversary year of Medicare, and providing critical opportunity for advancing important health reform discussions, especially with the federal election due in 2025. For us tonight, I do acknowledge the countries on which we're all in from tonight, wherever you may be. I'm on the land of the Yagara people. It's part of the larger Yagara nation in southeast Queensland, out towards the Ipswich region. And I pay my respects and the respects for all of us to all the traditional owners of country where you are and where you're participating in the webinar tonight, and also pay homage to their ongoing custodianship of the lands on which we are having the webinar tonight, but also the lands on which we live, breathe. For me, I walk on, I sleep on, I laugh on, I cry on, and face challenges and joy on as well, and I'm sure you all do too. So far in this series, we've already had 4 excellent webinars. Sometimes I call them seminars, but it's webinars. We had one on addressing oral health inequalities or inequities, improving healthcare in prisons for First Nation people, the National Scope of Practice Review, and better care pathways for people with knee osteoarthritis. I found that very interesting, and I've also changed some of my thinking around that and how I walk too because of that. So it's all learning for all of us. This webinar will inform related journalism by Croakey. We will have live tweeting, and there'll be an in-depth report by Croakey editor and journalist Marie McInerney after the event. My co-host tonight, James Blackwell, wasn't able to be here, so I will be hosting this webinar this evening. I'm really delighted to be joined by a great group of panelists. We've got Dr. Clinton Schultz, a Gamilaroi man and psychologist, Director of First Nations Strategy and Partnerships, Head of First Nations Research at the Black Dog Institute, who was involved with developing the Respectful Referendum Pledge. Clinton, please give everyone a wave so they can all know who you are. Thank you. I've got Bridget Cama here with us tonight. She's a Wiradjuri and Indigenous Fiji woman, born and raised in Lithgow, New South Wales, with connections to Gullygon River and Wellington in New South Wales. Bridget is a lawyer and has been working with the Uluru Dialogue since March 2019. She's currently a legal research officer to Professor Megan Davis, Pro Vice-Chancellor Society, UNSW, and Associate of Indigenous Law, Centre based at the UNSW Law and Justice Centre. And we were just talking about Professor Davis earlier. Shout out to you, Prof, if you're watching from Harvard University or you're watching this back later. We also have Lucy Davis. Lucy is a Cobble woman living on Yugambeh country. She is current National RAP Manager for the Salvation Army and a member of Mob 23. And Mob 23 is a collective of First Nations people and organisations in partnership with the Uluru Dialogues, which led a community-based campaign educating Australians on the Uluru Statement from the Heart in the lead up to the referendum on the Voice to Parliament. Lucy is also a mum, a teacher, a dancer, and a songwoman in her family and community. Mark Wenitong, or Dr. Mark Wenitong, is a Gubbi man with long-standing and wide-ranging experience in Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health. He's also the global lead for the Men's Health Movement for Movember for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander social and emotional wellbeing. So I'm going to move on, and you all know who the panelists are, but I'm going to move on to thinking around 1 year as we move up to the 1 year mark of the referendum, which was the 14th of October last year, 2023. We're not at that 1 year mark, but we're coming up very close to it. And I know for me, just talking for myself at this point, and then we'll move to each of the panelists. For me, that first few months, I really needed to have time just to be quiet and reflect. And I didn't say too much in a public way, and I didn't say too much either in a written way. I haven't written about the Uluru Statement or the Voice since that time. And the lead up to that, I did quite a bit. For me, I felt the need to have that time to grieve and to think about all the things that did happen, to process those, to undertake some of the healing processes that have been happening. And I know I was attended one, and there may have been people from the webinar that were there as well in Brisbane. So that was very, very refreshing and revitalizing for me. That evening that we all spent together here in Brisbane through a healing process and a ceremony. I've also processed some of the real negative things that happened and the experiences that I had of being yelled at and anger directed at me, and trying to understand some of that as well in terms of the population and turn that around into positives for me now. I'm now getting ready to start to write again around the referendum from October. But I also take comfort that we know 6.2, I think 6.2, 6.3, depending on what you read, million Australians voted yes. And so with that, I also lift up and have that as like wind under my wings, under my arms, in my heart and in my spirit, to know that we have a lot of people out there that also support us. And that gives me strength too going forward. So I'm going to, I think I'll come to Mark first, Mark Wenitong, and just hear some of your reflections, Mark,
Sure.
you know, on the past year, the changes you've noted, and, you know, maybe the differences it's made for you.
Yeah, look, hello to everybody there, and thanks for coming along this afternoon. My name's Mark, as we said, and my mob's Cubby in Vanuatu. And look, from my perspective, I have to say, personally, I was absolutely cut. As far as I was concerned, particularly the voices about life and death for the gigs that I work in remote and in primary healthcare, that was just wasn't a question about heart. It was just good intellect, good intelligence and good strategy, you know. So yeah, so I had to start with that because it did. The same way you were talking, I got asked to do interviews on ABC the next morning, and I just said, you don't have enough beeps in your little beep machine, so I'm not going to do an interview. But look, I think a couple of things for me. One is I think Australia as a nation has gone backwards since then. And for a lot of reasons, not just that, but I think that's part of it as well. And I think it's kind of there's a bit of a lack of trust in anything these days in Australia, from politicians right through to media and anything else, and corporates and organisations and stuff like that. And maybe rightly so as well. Maybe we had too much trust in people in the past. I really did think that there was a political vacuum, a lack of real political leadership by all parties. And I do think those who were supportive were pretty ambivalent anyway. And when I heard the mantra that Queensland Labor talked about, and the people have spoken and the people always right, it sounded like something out of the children of the corn to me. It was just a stupid thing to say. I know it was, you know, that's what you say, but that's just absolute rubbish anyway. That's not leadership.
No.
That's populism, you know. So in areas like mine, you know, Far North Queensland, it would have been up to 80 or 90% no vote. Strangely, every coffee shop I go into in the morning has a whole bunch of non-Indigenous people wearing Aboriginal logo shirts. Maybe there's a latte bias, or something up here. I don't know. But I think I honestly believe that Australia won't be the lucky country anymore. I think our land and our ancestors are not happy about this result, and that's nothing to do with me. That's between mainstream mob and our ancestors. That's their problem now. But I do believe that our mob, I think we've matured through this. I think we've gone to a new level of reality and understanding of where we sit. in this country. I think we really need to start thinking about new strategies. We obviously do, because where we've been going is not going to hit the mark, and CTG is not even hitting the mark, especially in the most important parts, early childhood and
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
that. As we were discussing before, it's kind of thinking like somebody who's been long-term abused. You start getting used to that, and until you go overseas and talk to other people, you don't realise what kind of situation you're in. And you get out of that situation anyway. And look, I'm a big fan of treaties, but I look at New Zealand today, and even my Canadian brothers over there, and I'm, in touch with people because we want to know how to set up a Maori health authority. And their first response to me was, "Oh, we just got shut down." So treaties are a really useful tool, but they're not the be all and end all.
That's right.
And so I don't know where we're going to go from here. I know, Queensland. I don't think anybody wants us to have a treaty in Queensland, particularly politically. So I don't know where that's going to go. But I know if the government changes in Queensland, it'll be worse, almost certainly worse. So what my strategies have been more strategizing around meso level system operators rather than high level politics, and changing the system that way. Because as you said, like 40% of Australians voted yes. As far as I can tell, the 40% who voted yes were more affluential, influential, and intellectual. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm not trying to put anyone down, but I'm saying a lot of the system operators who understood this context voted yes. And they're important people in the health system, so that we can work with them, and we don't have to go to the top all the time and try and get political stuff, because we're such a minority. And now that the rest of Australian politics know we don't have a lot of support from Australia, there's not a big prerogative for them to really do lots for us. But we do have good people in the system, and that's the main thing. I think in our new environment, we really have to start paying attention to the details around some of these macro policy things we get through. The National Health Reform Agreements, the evaluation of IHPs, and all those kind of things. And look, I've been involved in them, and I know how hard it is when you're working full time to get your head around leverage between the states and territories and the feds, in 5 minutes, and try and do all that sort of stuff. So I know most of us are overworked already, and we're coming into these things trying to do policy as well. But we've got to do that, and we've got a lot more people that can step up these days as well. And that goes not just in primary healthcare, like for the nachos, but also in the health and hospital systems themselves. And we have senior Aboriginal clinicians in those services now, and they're going to have to step up. Particularly about racism in the health system. And I think the other thing is that sooner or later, we're going to have a whiz-bang social media approach, because we got smashed by social media, and to have a truthful 10-second message is really, really difficult. To have a dishonest one is really easy. So it's how we're going to deal with that in the future, and how we get our messages right, but particularly around contemporary messaging and things like that. I think we got smashed, That's when I think we need that Black Siri for no, I don't mean that. Black Siri's just out of control. But the other things that I think we've got to look at now are, one is we just got to stop being nice. I know I've sat down and talked to international community relations people with mining companies who said to me, your people are just too nice. You give us stuff, you help us. In South America, people are blowing up excavators. In Africa, they're shooting people. Here, we're helping them. We've just been too nice for too long, I think, and that goes for racism and all the other things as well. So I think it's time for us to start really using the Western system properly, and making people accountable via legal action. And to finish off, my biggest concern, I think, is for our youth. I'd hate to feel the way, if I was a young person, I'd hate to feel the way I felt about Australia not having our back. And I know it's more complicated than that, but that's exactly my perception, and was my perception at the time. So
thank you.
Youth going forward have got to have hope. Their hope's going to have to be in us as leaders, and the adults that are here now, and those that are trying to drive change, we're their hope, not the rest of Australia. So we've really got to step up and help them to manage and maintain optimism in that, because we're awesome people, We'll survive, no problems at all. There's no problem with that. We'll get by, but it could have been a lot easier, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I know when you're talking about stepping up, and that pressure to step up. For me, on that night of the referendum, an hour later, you know, the ABC was ringing to the room that I was in, which was, I was actually at Ipswich Trades Hall that night. There was a lot of people there, a lot of people. And someone had to do the radio national interview live, and community pointed to me, and that was the young people that just looking at me, and I thought, I got to step up, you know. And it's those times too, I think, in the pain and the hardship, because you all imagine how hard that was within an hour to do a live to air radio interview. And I went and did it. 2 people sat with me and I did that. But that was also to model for the young people. But it shouldn't be that hard, knowing that, you know, I'm in Ipswich and 4 out of 5 voted no. So it's very hard. But the legal practice and the processes, I have seen a bit of stepping up in people now framing, you know, discrimination claims and racism claims down here in southeast Queensland, and previously they would have gone and raised it by just verbal concerns, but straight away taking things up now. I'm going to talking about the legal part. Lucy, did you have your hand up? Because I'll go to Bridget and come back to you if that's all right.
No, I was reacting,
No,
but my reactions aren't very good.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Bridget.
Thanks. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm joining from Bidjigal country here in Sydney this evening. It's nice to see everyone online, and thank you for having me speak tonight. Just by way of background, I've worked with the Uluru Dialogue since 2019, and that's been a key part of the work that I've done under Prof. Davis and Auntie Pat Anderson AO. So just want to note their leadership in the space as well, along with other people like yourselves, Auntie Bron and others, on Lucy and others on the line tonight. Just want to recognise that. And Alira Davis as well, who's not on the call tonight, but she's my co-chair of the Uluru Youth Dialogue, and we led the youth movement, particularly by First Nations young people from across the country, to provide a space for young people to have a voice and have a platform to engage in the process of a referendum, at the first in our lifetime, which was a big deal. We learned a lot from that. And I think whilst, like everybody else, we were really hurting, and I just want to say, you know, everything that you said, Mark, is spot on, that it's really hard because young people, you know, the fact that we have the highest youth suicide in the entire world says a lot. And I won't dwell on that, but at the same time, you know, there's young people out there who are ready to step up and who know that there's no other option. I guess it's our futures on the line. So if we don't step up, and if our elders don't allow that space, then what does our future look like? So there's definitely young people out there that are ready to take up that fight. And, you know, we've taken a year now to really try and process that from an Uluru Dialogue perspective. And I've been tasked with a lot of reading from Professor Davis to try and, I guess, figure out what happened. And I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. You know, don't have all the answers, but I do want to unpack the no a little bit. But first, I just wanted to reflect on what this afternoon's theme is: voice matters. And obviously, voice matters for everybody, no matter who you are, where you come from. But unfortunately for us as First Nations people, we still don't have a guaranteed voice in this country, as you all know. And that directly stems from the way in which the system was set up, that we were exclusively excluded from the Constitution in the beginning. That wasn't remedied until 1969, but we've never been positively recognised. And that's an ongoing issue. So I just want to talk about why we still do need a voice. And my position is that we go again, that we still need a voice no matter what. And we know that the last year has shown us that. You can point to many examples of why we still need a voice. You know, the fact that Aboriginal women were left out of national conversations around gendered violence. How does that happen? How do young people be locked up at the age of 10? That explicitly affects First Nations young people, you know, babies. How are all these things happening? How are ministers making decisions at a whim on, you know, processes around decision making on country? All of those things are reasons why we still need a voice, and that, I think, is a long-term goal that we have. You know, I don't want to stretch it out too far, but I mean, in the next 10 years, I definitely want to be working towards having that structural reform. The ask of the Uluru Statement doesn't go away just because we had a failed referendum. And I think what you already said around the 6.2 million friends that we've made throughout this process is really important. And I definitely felt like the country hated us on the 14th of October, and I was in the room with Lucy and many others, and we were just like, you know, it was devastating. But since then, taking that time to really process what happened and being able to look at some research and start to unpack that made me realize that racism and hate was only one part of it. And I think it's really dangerous, actually, that there's rhetoric out there pointing to racism as the reason that the referendum lost, because it's actually so much more complicated than that. And we need to start having those conversations. Otherwise, the rest of Australia is going to think that that's the reason too. But for me, what's most important is that our young people don't think that that is the reason the referendum lost. That is not a good place to be in. And I think that the Uluru Dialogue's planned listening tour is when we're going to start to unpack that, to let our mob know that it was actually really complex. You know, things like the fact that the voice wasn't the top thing that people were talking about at their dinner tables. It was actually cost of living. The voice was like 5th on the list. You know, the fact that civics education is lacking, and that people thought that the voice would insert race into the Constitution, but race already is in the Constitution. People actually thought that they were voting to help Aboriginal people because they saw through the media that it was represented as 50-50, that Aboriginal people didn't really want it, and they felt that they couldn't vote yes to it because the media was saying that Aboriginal people didn't know whether or not they wanted it. You know, community voices lacking in that whole conversation. So I guess, you know, we can look at Close the Gap. That's not working, as was already said. That's limited in itself. We look to the Productivity Commission report on closing the gap, and it's really clear that communities say if we had structural reform in place, that would help them be able to have agency and power to make decisions that are community driven. And we know that the solutions are in community. So I guess where to now, just wrapping up. Some actions that you can take as individuals is sign up to the Uluru Dialogue newsletter, which we're sending out fortnightly. And that will include updates around what's happening, as well as actions you can take every fortnight. And we're also looking at collating a list of local groups who support the Uluru Statement. So if you're a part of any community groups that fit that description, please reach out to us, and I'll put all the details in the chat. But I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bridget. So a few things there to follow Uluru Dialogues if you're not already, and look out for the newsletters in your inbox and what's happening, coming around the country, and events, and where you can support, but also that they're wanting to pull together a list of all the different groups that are doing action. And I know there are some groups that are doing, you know, activities and workshops and still ongoing support. So if you're in a group like that, please forward that as well through the contact site at the Uluru Dialogues. Thank you. Lucy, I'm going to come to you, then I'm going to go to Clinton. So Lucy, over to you. What's the difference it's made in your life, and How are you managing this, or your reflections since the referendum?
Thank you. I'll try not to repeat because I feel the same as Uncle and Bridge. Pretty gutted. But you know, I'm a mum, so I've got to get up and keep going for my kids. But being on the front line of campaign with many of you, I think for me, last year it was exciting, but it was also really moving and encouraging to see how many First Nations voices were at the forefront. You couldn't go on social media, and even if they were no or yes, whichever way, there was blackfellas on there, right? It was exciting for us. Like, it was in social media, it was on the paper, it was on TV, and this year you hear crickets. You hear absolutely
That's
nothing.
true.
And that's what breaks my heart, because the Uluru Statement was signed by 250 different people across the nation, plus from their community, saying we need a voice. And this narrative that went out that blackfellas didn't want it. And yet these communities were the highest populated. First time mob had voted in some of these communities. I think Wadair was 97.3% a yes vote, but these communities all said yes. And you see why right now, because there's crickets. There's governments leading truth-telling commissions. There's governments leading all this kind of stuff, and asked us to submit after they've actually put a proposal forward, when we actually gave the olive branch. The olive branch was given yet again. And not only did we give it, we brought a whole heap of communities along with us. We brought mob with us that said, we need a conversation about running water, clean running water in our communities. We need a conversation about how to keep our women safe in our communities. All these different nations coming together saying, we need you. You know what? Us mob don't like politicians. We don't like government, but we need the Australian people to walk with us.
Yeah.
But I agree with Uncle. The social media and I guess wealth and all that, we were always playing catch up. We were always playing catch up because the way that it was saturated through social media, the no rhetoric was really hard to try and keep up. And then doing the frontline campaign stuff, we would spend 20 to 30 minutes talking about why voting in this referendum won't necessarily have effect on your Medicare. Like, I don't know what's happening, but there was a lot of conversations when we're out in community, teaching people the difference between local council, state and federal government, what a referendum was. And then when you would say to Australians, even conspiracy theorists, hey, this Uluru Statement was never about politicians. This is about empowering our voices. This is about us being a part of a system that is forever disempowering us. We need to be a part of the system so our voices are heard. Even they would say, oh, okay, I get it. Oh, I thought you were pro-government. Oh, I thought you were pro this, pro. No. This is about trying to maneuver our way into the system, because like Bridge said, in a national DV scene, there's no First Nations voices, women's voices. You know, there's all these groups that are set up and led, but the people that are on the ground that know what's best in their communities are silenced. And you're seeing that now. It's the same stuff over and over again. For me, I was with Bridge. I was there that night. I watched Bridget and the young people roll the Uluru Statement up. And honestly, it was like being at a funeral, because the Mutijulu people had created the statement, had painted it and gifted it as part of ceremony for the Australian people. There was a choice. Do we give it to Turnbull? Do we invite Shorten? Do we invite them? No. We give it to the Australian people, because they know how fed up we are with politics. They know how fed up we are with governments. They will understand this. But it just was always, we were always playing catch up. I honestly think the proposal of the Uluru Statement Dialogues team of going out doing an education piece to teach people what the Uluru Statement meant, what a referendum would have been, You know, I honestly think that should have been the proposal that was rejected by the current government. They went the other way. That's why Yes 23 led it. And this is where we are. And we're still playing catch up, and we're still like crickets. I work very much I work for the Salvation Army. I work in faith-based communities and organizations. And I admire the Salvos right now because they've chosen to work. They've chosen to work as if there was a yes vote. So, and that can happen to others. You know, whatever happens, the noise out there with governments and politicians doesn't have to mean that in your workplace that you have to still copy that. You know, you can choose to empower First Nations voices. My heart is sore for those communities, those many communities that voted yes. My heart is sore for those communities who, you know, had 96 to 80% mob voting yes, because they're the ones that really, really needed it. And they stood by us. The one thing that I always say is that, and I like to, because everyone made up figures during the referendum, so I just say 6.4 million now. We got 6.4 million new friends. But the one thing that I think is, and I guess for me, it was different because Megan's my sister. So I got to go through a lot of that stuff with her. But the one thing that has kept us going is those 6.2, 6.5, just add another figure on, million new friends. Because you know what? With those new friends, we are staying true to Uluru. We are not going to be dictated by governments and politicians of what we know is right in our communities. When you know, like when you bring us to the table in our communities on Yugambeh country, then I know what's right. I know what happens in my community. I can speak to that. So, you know, I've always been, I actually think I'm probably more political than my sister. She would say she'd agree with that. I do campaign and I have supported, but I was really, really ashamed and upset by the Labor by Labor, because out of the something like 68 electorates, only 20 plus voted yes. Yeah. And I went into a Labor meeting and I said, I want to be the reminder of why the Labor Party was formed. I want to be that reminder that you had an opportunity to do what you did today in Queensland, hold a massive ceremony and invite community and talk about truth telling. You could have done that with the Uluru Statement. You could have done that with this referendum, but there wasn't. How many people had no idea what they were voting on? Many Australians had absolutely no idea what they were voting on. Many Australians did not know what the Uluru Statement is. You know, there should have been an education piece. And I think that's my, I don't know, I'm still very upset, but I will stay true to Uluru, and I'm very grateful for the many friends that I call brothers and sisters now that I've met along this journey. And I'll continue this path, and I will honour the 250 plus people that signed that statement and the Mutijulu people who gifted it to the Australian people. That's what gives me hope, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Thank you for that. It is a reminder to everybody that, you know, Labor, I did the numbers on the 3 federal electorates near me, and each of those federal electorates of those 3 did not even get half up for yes. So despite all of them asking me to come and talk within them at meetings and gatherings, and that was disappointing that they didn't also mobilize their own people. The results in terms of the Greens were patchy as well. Like, you can look at the numbers, you can look at all of those in terms of the electorates. You can drill down into the figures, and some people have done some of that work as well. So you look for where they've got blogs on that. I'm going to move across to Clinton, because Clinton, with your background too, you'd have other kind of takes on how people process this. You'd have your own in terms of your own processing, but also, you know, how people may have felt and reflections on that, and how people can still keep moving forward. So I'd like you to talk to that a little bit. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks, Bronwyn. G'day, friends. Yeah, look, I was on the point live with Arnie Mars while the whole referendum count was happening, and you know, it was devastating to be sitting there and to see those figures coming through, but also having to be sitting beside people who didn't share, I wouldn't even say similar views, I'd say even empathetic or sympathetic views or understandings for the social emotional wellbeing impact that the whole process, not even just the outcome, but the entire process was having and was likely to continue having on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, you know, and that was our real concern going into it and post it. Was we could see that there was this increased community tension and polarization, not just internal amongst our own communities, but across the Australian project. And we could see that the way that the dialogue was being undertaken throughout media and across politics was completely lacking of respect towards our social emotional wellbeing as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And that's why we were so, I guess, steadfast on trying to get people to be more respectful in the way that they were undertaking the conversation and the process. One, so that this process could hopefully not have as large a social emotional wellbeing impact as it has had, but also so we could hopefully learn some things, knowing that there was further processes, which are all parts of the Uluru Statement, that we were going to have to enter into moving forward as well. So I think at times people feel like the voice referendum thing, we got that out of the way a year ago. It's not something we have to consider or think about now. And therefore, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, you know, we should be able to just start moving forward. And there's a lack of insight within that of this process was never supposed to be isolated, first and foremost, or was the impact ever going to be captured or ended on that day? So what we've actually seen since the referendum is, you know, an increase in community tension and polarization, and not just about the voice and the referendum and other elements of the Uluru Statement, but around a whole bunch of political issues. And I think the way that the whole process was handled from politics and media has in a way enabled for that increasing disrespectful dialogue of important events to occur throughout the country. We've also seen increases in racism, deficit discourse, misrepresentation, but unfortunately, what we've seen a lot of internally amongst our communities is an increase in lateral violence. And we know that lateral violence is actually one of the most detrimental things to our social emotional wellbeing as mob, because we are connected peoples. And we have to put up with so much tension, oppression, and all those other things that impact on social emotional wellbeing from the outside anyhow, that when we start attacking each other, it just takes it to that next level and becomes very quickly overwhelming for mob. So we've seen heavy increase in people wanting to access services for social emotional wellbeing support, but there's no increase in service availability. So we've created a situation where we've got more people who are needing social emotional wellbeing support ongoing, even a year on from the debate itself and the outcome, but we still actually don't have an increase in service availability. We had little pieces handed out from government here and there that haven't actually attended to the problem, which is we do not have enough services available to assist people with the significantly increased amount of social emotional wellbeing disturbance that we've seen. I was quite fortunate that the week after the referendum, I was actually out for law ceremony. So I was completely disconnected from the Western world for a whole week post the intervention. That was good for me, but it was extremely difficult for my family because they were at home. Like I had kids that didn't go to school post that because they didn't want to have to face the racism at school. I had one of my boys who was sent to the office because he tried to challenge his teacher on which way she may or may not have voted during the referendum. And so he was kind of made out as if he was in the wrong for questioning these things. And so it was very difficult for them to be at home while I was away and to have to process as young men, because I've got 3 young boys, how to process this. But what I have seen come out of it in a positive light, both within my own children and more broadly amongst youth, is a massive amplification of cultural strength and resilience. I think it's really lit a torch under many young people who may have not been involved in sort of political affairs or rights campaigning or any of that stuff before, to really step up and look at what their responsibilities as a member of a collective group is, and to stand up for us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the next generations coming through, which has been great to see. And I also think, and it's been mentioned by most people here, that 6 million allies, whatever number we want to put on it, what that's actually done is shown that we do have this swell of support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices, and therefore our social and emotional well-being. And now our role, I think, is to look at how do we continue to bolster that in a way that can get us to the outcomes that we need, which is improved social and emotional well-being for us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I think for us as mob, our role is to support each other and to ensure that we are being mindful that we're not perpetuating lateral violence towards each other based on where we may have sat on this on the day of the vote, but really trying to practice and share lateral kindness with each other.
Thank you.
Because it didn't matter where you sat, you were impacted by the whole process.
Yeah, thank you, Clinton. There's some commonalities in what everybody said, you know, around the reflections and how people felt. There's also commonalities around thinking about young people. Bridget mentioned young people. You mentioned young people, Clinton, including your boys. Lucy talked about, you know, her kids and young people and how they were. Mark talked about, you know, young people and having to step up and us stepping up for those young people too. I'm going to just ask Bridget to talk about what the youth dialogue's been doing, because I know recently you had a meeting, and what are they doing going forward? We've got, you know, roughly, I don't know, 10 minutes before we have to start wrapping up, and then we will be available after the 1 hour. Some of us who wants to stay on a bit longer, but formally it'll finish at 6. But I'm going to ask Bridget to talk about young people going forward. And then after Bridget speaks, we're going to turn back to the panelists to give some very quick, each person, Mark, Clinton, Lucy and Bridget, 1 or 2 or 3 things they can do leading up to the state and federal elections, and also around, you know, action going forward for people who are on the webinar tonight. So Bridget, over to you. Just be mindful of time. Thank you.
Yeah, I think after the referendum, there was a mixed reaction in our Uluru Youth Dialogue members. Half of the group were ready to like get back out there the next day, and they were angry, and they were like, how's this happening? Like, we can't give up. We need to keep going. We need to keep going. And then the other half of the group were, you know, wanting to just take a step back and process and do all of that. But I think now, about a year on, we've just had our Uluru Youth Dialogue Summit, which is the first time that we physically met after the referendum on Kabi Kabi country, which was really special. And it was, you know, about 30 young First Nations leaders and from across the country. And I guess we started to have the hard conversation about, well, what next? What happens next? And what role do young people play in this? And I think, you know, from Alira and I's experience, we always wanted to create a space that was led by First Nations youth. But we knew that we
Yeah.
couldn't do it alone. And so we hosted the Hands on Heart conference, which brought another 60 non-Indigenous young leaders from communities right across Australia, from various backgrounds, religions, together in Barangaroo on Gadigal country last year. And that was a really special moment. So I think moving forward, we know that that's what it's going to take. And for us, it's about being smart and being strategic and doing the hard work. You know, we can't sit where we were, we can't sit in the same space that we were last year, and we have to take the learnings of last year and use them in order to move forward. And I think, you know, when we really think about it, it's not a huge amount of people. Like, we do have that 6.2 million already there that have voted yes, and our research is showing that they're really staunch in their vote. It's not just that they had two options and that they just went and voted yes or no. Our research is showing that they really understood the proposal. They understood that it came from mob and that it would make a positive impact not only on our lives but our entire country, to be a better country. Like, that's what we want. It's about really, you know, opening that up to all Australians, that we're in this together, that it's not just a Black issue, that it's the responsibility of every Australian. And it's also interesting because I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a very different voting population. We know that young people were so progressive on this. Well, young people are progressive. We want action, whether that's on climate change, social issues. Like, we want better, and we want people to come together.
I'm gonna pull you up because we're gonna run over.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
And I know these mob can talk long time, good ways, but I'm gonna ask Bridget, one thing that people on this webinar can do now. What's this thing they can do tomorrow when they get up?
Oh no, can you come back to me?
I'll go to Lucy first. Lucy, what's the one or two things they can do tomorrow going forward in light of the state election, wherever you are, wherever people are dialing in from? You would have one forthcoming. Queensland's only in a few weeks. The federal election next year. What can you do? What can they do?
In regards to voting?
Yep, in terms of First Nations people and thinking about voice, thinking about Indigenous people.
It's a hard one, Bronnie, because on one hand, you want to support the party that is supporting First Nations people, but on the other hand, they've both screwed us. So that's probably a really bad answer. I'm probably not very informed, but that's how that's how we feel. We're disheartened by governments. That has not changed. What I will say, in a couple of weeks' time, on the referendum day, the referendum is coming up, what we are asking people to do is go to a park. Follow Mob 23, go to a park, follow Uluru Dialogues, invite some people, share in food, and post it all over your socials on October the 14th.
That's a beautiful thing.
One thing that we can remind each other is from the 6.8, like that. I jumped from 6.2 to 3 to 4, 5. Now I'm up to 8. The 6.8 friends that we have, we should share in this day and look after each other. And last thing, and then I won't talk again. Stay true to Uluru.
Oh yeah.
When
are they coming out? When are we getting them?
Very, very soon. Go to the Uluru statement page. But you know, if you want to go on the journey with us, we welcome everyone. And and one thing that we did learn massively during this last year is that we need you. We need our allies. We need we need you to come with us and be with us this whole way. When it gets awkward, when it gets uncomfortable, we need you with us. I won't talk now, and I think you're awesome, Bronnie, doing this and trying to control the yarn, because have you ever tried to do one with Professor Megan Davis?
I have. Hey, you're runner up there for sister there now. Okay, let's go over to Mark Wenitong. Dr. Wenitong.
Yep. Look, just a couple of things around the election. I think our friends. My message is that our friends that 40% really do need to activate, because we can get as many blackfellas to vote as we like in a Queensland election. It's not going to make that much of a difference because our population's so small, and half of us are too young to vote. So that's one thing. I know we've got to be activated in that as well. But I just wanted to shout out to Bridget. I gained hope from her rather than her gaining hope from me. So thanks for that, Bridget. And brother, like, what was your term? Lateral kindness. Well, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful term. I love it. I'm going to use it. And I think we all need to start practicing that a lot more. There's reasons, as you know, why our mob can be pretty reactive at times, and partly it's because we've got an activated stress response half the time, since birth, just about. So we spark up pretty easy. But we're also passionate, loving people, kind people. More than anything else, and we've been kind for a long time, and that's what that gift from Uluru to the Australian public was. That was pure kindness and love, But we'll maintain that. That's what I think we should do.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. Over to you, Clinton.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Look, I just want to share some of our Gomeroi sort of ways and hope that it can guide all Australians, not just mob. We've always been peoples that have practiced ownership and accountability and collective responsibility, and I think what we need all Australians to do is actually be able to shift their mindset to collective responsibility and understand what impact what they say, think and do actually can have on others and on place around them moving forward. And that's all I could ask for.
Thank you. Thank you. So just be mindful, everybody, on the 14th of October. Do what you can in terms of the elections coming forward. I think from my perspective, one of the things is talking to the candidates about what they are committed to, what they're prepared to take a stand on. If you give them your vote in terms of, if you're in Queensland, holding true, yes, we've got the truth-telling process going on, but are they still going to hold truth to treaty, and are they committed to a voice? So I certainly will be asking candidates that, and writing letters and doing everything I normally do. But also on the 14th of October, taking care, and those people I work with, offering care on that day, as well as family, because in all of this, along the pathway with us, and supporting us to do what we have needed to do as well in the campaign. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention all those people. I want to thank everybody for coming along tonight, and remind people that this is part of a Croakey live event. It's part of Croakey's Medicare 40 years project. Is a project spanning a year to mark the anniversary of Medicare, and has been providing opportunity to advance important issues like the one we've had tonight around voice matters, but also other issues that have centred specific things around health reform and health reform changes that are needed in the Australian populace. There is a federal election looming in 2025, so I can expect we will have more Croakey live events. But thank you for joining us all tonight. If you want to hang around, please do. This will finish around 6 o'clock, the live event now. And so I understand some people will move off. But if you want to stay around and have a chat and talk a bit more, please feel welcome. And once again, thank you all for being part of it. Look out for Mari's article when it comes out, probably in a week or so. Sometimes she gets them out pretty quick, sometimes a little bit longer, but she's always got them out. So look out for that. Also check out for her tweets and other people's tweets tonight on the hashtags that were provided earlier. All right. Good night, everybody.